Shloka Nath of Tata Trusts. Good day to you, Shloka. Shloka is also one of our esteemed jury members tomorrow during the grand final. Shloka, you work for the non-profit arm of Tata. Like I said, a global giant. Can you take us through what it is exactly that you do?
Of course. I actually lead the sustainability portfolio at the Tata Trusts. I actually built it up and established it about 3 years ago. And one of our core initiatives is something called the India Climate Collaborative, which is a first of its kind, India focused, Indian led collaborative platform of business and philanthropy to drive climate action in India.
Yeah, and is this a big thing in India? We hardly hear about it here. That's why I'm asking.
It's a very big thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's becoming bigger and bigger as we go along. Climate action is increasingly becoming sort of one of the key pieces for India's recovery as well from COVID, obviously.
Right. So India has a law that is very strict when it comes to the combination of large companies on the one hand and climate and other special projects on the other hand. Can you take us through that law?
Yes, of course. So look, the good news is that Indian businesses or large Indian businesses are increasingly focused on climate issues. And this is really important because over the last few years, the share and absolute quantum of foreign funding for India has actually reduced.
Hmm.
So the Ministry of Home Affairs actually reports that over 13,000 nonprofit licenses were cancelled between 2015 and 2018. And
13,000.
13, one
Yes.
three.
Hmm.
And this is as the government becomes more and more stringent about who can accept foreign funding. In fact, just last week, we had yet another amendment to the Foreign Contribution Act, which again restricts foreign funding for nonprofits in the country.
Hmm.
So, at the same time, the good news, however, at the same time, is that domestic funding has actually grown to fill this gap. And it was really spurred by the government mandated law, which said that quite recently that companies of a certain scale and profitability had to spend at least 2% of their net profit on their corporate social responsibility, or CSR as we call
Right.
it. So businesses can invest their profits in areas such as education, poverty, gender, equality, and hunger as part of their CSR compliance.
Hmm.
I think what's important to point out is that sustainability and climate action is increasingly becoming a very important central focus area under that law.
Right. So would it be fair to say that your department is that 2% you're talking about? Is your department the part that the Indian law says has to be, doing social work, so to speak?
Actually, no, because we are an independent mandated foundation. So we were set up as a public set of trusts or charities, and we actually own the main shareholding of the group company.
Hmm.
We're the largest shareholder, and we actually our corpus is spent off the dividends of that shareholding. So it's quite different from Western foundations, which have an endowment that they sort of run off each year.
Hmm.
We actually have a corpus that comes in every year, depending on how well our companies are doing.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a little bit of a different setup, but we do as the Tata Group. Obviously, each of the companies does have a CSR mandate
Hmm.
and spend, of
Yeah.
course.
So India is known for its innovations and for its IT and tech organizations. What would you say are the main issues at this moment on that field? What's working in India? What's going on?
So, great question. Let me kind of take you through perhaps what's going on when it comes to climate action and what we're seeing with corporations right now. And then I can tell you about some of the new areas of investment that are bubbling up.
Great.
So, when it comes to climate change, I think what's important to know is that, like most economies, business performance on climate action in India can actually be classified as a few leaders, a large number of those who comply, and then, of course, you have your laggards. So leaders are those sort of usual suspects that you can see across all climate commitments globally, whether it's RE100 or EP100, internal carbon pricing, etc. Of course, this group, by the way, also is a large part of the constituency of the ICC, or the India Climate Collaborative. But because the climate ethos runs through these organizations and is driven right at the top, this group is actually a very sort of effective peer-to-peer engagement tool in the business community. And they reassure the government that they will support strong climate action and build the capacities of suppliers and their value chains to do so. I think what's interesting here to note is that in the pre-COVID era, Indian CEOs had increasingly begun to recognize the risks that climate change posed to their businesses, but also the opportunities to innovate on products and services.
Like what
And
risks? Like what risks, for example?
well, just, infrastructure risks. There are tremendous sort of infrastructure risks for a country like India. We have a very long coastline. We have a highly dependent agrarian economy, and one that is also really dependent on fossil fuels. And you can sort of read between the lines there in terms of what that spells for us as a future going, as a country going forward. I think, it's an interesting tension in India, right? Because our overarching development goal is to deliver sustainable prosperity to our people. But achieving this goal requires that the Indian economy has to be simultaneously transformed across two different dimensions. So first, India has to be globally competitive, across a range of key sectors. We have to have infrastructure, energy, financial services, aviation, telecom, manufacturing. All of these sort of different facets of the economy have to be growing. Second, India also has to adopt a resource efficient, low carbon development pathway to utilize very scarce natural resources very effectively. And so, in short, India's growth has to be green. And no nation has ever attempted these two twin transformations simultaneously ever before.
So that's a huge project you're embarked on.
Yes, and a lot of other sort of climate actors on the ground in India, of course, but again, we really have an opportunity to sort of grow, to really develop climate action as one of the biggest drivers for the Indian economy. And to just give you an example, the World Economic Forum released a report in July this year, and they estimated that over half of the world's GDP, that's about $44 trillion, that's potentially threatened by anthropogenic damage to our natural environment. Yet, on the flip side, they've identified key systemic transitions that could offer a gain of almost 10 trillion USD to create over, nearly 400 million jobs by 2030. So sustainability is no longer this isolated cry of activists or nature enthusiasts. It's the future of the global economy.
Yes, and it's part of the DNA, so to speak, in India. So what do you think other countries can learn from this approach and from the way India runs things?
So I think, there's a lot to learn. India has a long way to go. We haven't actually we've recognized this tension, and we still have to sort of make that decision, whether or not we're going to catch that wave, or are we going to continue to look at an outdated model of development in order to predict our future. And my sense is that a lot of other developing countries across the globe are facing the same predicament. I think, to give you a quick snapshot, India's green growth or recovery is really going to require an average investment of, I would say, almost 125 billion per year for climate mitigation alone. And that's a big sort of financing gap to build. The private sector is going to have to play a really primary role in financing this green transformation.
Are they willing? Is the private sector willing?
They are, but we do have to mobilize the private sector to step up investment in clean tech and energy sectors, in public policy efforts, governance reform, capacity building, regulatory intervention. You need all of these pieces in equal measure. And so we're looking at very innovative mechanisms and solutions. Green finance instruments will have to be designed to unlock private capital flows. But I think what we really require right now are demonstrated economic returns as well as policy predictability. And that's the sort of direction in which we need to move. And hopefully a lot of developing economies are thinking of it the same way.
What would you say were the largest obstacles still in your way to reaching that goal?
I would say that we need to move from a narrative of the ease of doing business to the ease of doing climate.
And can you please be more specific?
So that really requires, for instance, policy stability, a rethinking of our energy subsidies. We have to prioritize clean energy access. We have to provide the right international signals on our climate commitments. We have to create a narrative that really balances mitigation goals with the principles of inclusion, sustainability, justice, and equity. And you have to sort of marry those two in order to drive this agenda forward. And that really is the sort of the task before us, if you will.
I understand.